Good evening and welcome again to Solutionary TV. I am your host, Dr. Tatiana, and I am always here to be in the fun, in the play, in the education of discussing these issues that are important to all of us. These are global issues, but outside the mainstream narrative so that we can really get to the solutions, we can get to the expertise, the innovators, the boots on the ground examples of those that are making all of the difference, and we can join in that solution. So in harmony with that being our quest and our purpose, our guest tonight is someone special in the area of understanding what fear can do to quality of life and how fear can also lead to uncertainty around transitioning and death and other major aspects of our lives that are always going to be in a state of flux and change and living exceptionally well. Let me introduce you to our guest tonight. His name is Kelvin Chen. Kelvin currently focuses on teaching in 3 areas. He's got an expansive band of expertise. Turning within is a meditation and a method that is overcoming for the fear of death and a non-religious spiritual development. He graduated from Dartmouth College, Yale University, and Boston College of Law. So he's got quite a background in business and other fields that parlay into this as well. At a very young age, at the age of 19, Kelvin learned how to meditate and later studying personally and directly underneath the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who taught millions how to meditate effortlessly. Kelvin taught his first meditation courses at West Point and in the U.S. Army in Korea, so he's had a background working with those that really could use that consciousness shift. Since then, he has continued to teach an even simpler technique, making it even easier to learn. In his mid-20s, Kelvin spontaneously began to recall ancient memories from centuries ago. One major theme surfaced. No matter how eternal our minds seem to be, we tend to fall in the same reoccurring patterns of behavior over and over again. So Kelvin has shifted his focus away from the corporate career, having ripened, to helping others navigate life's often challenging issues and waters, with the goal of improving the quality of life and offering better, more effective ways of thinking about life's thorny issues, the cruelty, the imperfection, uncertainty, etc., by demystifying the mystical and by teaching his clients how to turn on the opposite of the fight and flight switch, eliminating anxiety and restoring balance to their lives. It was a mouthful, but he is so worth it. I am excited to welcome Kelvin Chen. Welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's great to be here.
Well, let's go into some of this. This is really exciting when we talk about, these 3 areas of turning within and your expertise from a much broader platform that has been both professional and obviously involved in having sway with the military and West Point. Obviously, you figured out how to apply the very best of your talents and your gifts to be able to move into this more maybe touchy or lesser known in the West area of meditation. So I know that we were going to discuss many things this evening, but let's talk about why this was important to you. It's a really young age to have started
Sure.
at 20 to meditate. Let's talk a little bit about how life directed you that way and then what shifts took place from there.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Boston, a suburb of Boston, and people will often ask me, is it because you were Asian that you got into meditation? And and the truth of the matter is absolutely not. My parents were both scientists, and they were like the farthest from anything meditation oriented that you could get. And so I really just kind of fell into it. It was one of those serendipitous kind of things when I was at college, and I was 19 years old. And I was looking for something more in life, and I didn't know exactly what that meant. And so I went around and I kind of surveyed a number of different meditation teachers and techniques and so forth that would come through the college campus. Mm-hmm. And that's when I found Transcendental Meditation, TM, and I studied directly with Maharishi. And that's when I taught with him. I learned how to teach, get certified and all of that, and was one of the international leaders in the TM movement a few years after the Beatles learned.
Wow.
And then I moved away from it somewhat in kind of developed my own thing away from the organization as it went in a certain different direction than I wanted to go. I wanted to stay more focused on the meditation, and they got into other things. So It's a simple process that I teach, non-religious, and we could talk more about that. But what got me into it was really an internal, as you kind of imply, an internal drive and looking for more. Just kind of knowing that there was more out there and more in there, so to speak, within myself, I suppose. And that's what I discovered.
Right. And obviously that was a pivotal time in your life. We go through these transitions, life transitions, and we know that for many that leave the comforts of home and they're off in a much more independent world of thinking when they're in college, some get into real reckless and rebellious activity. Others discover some of their hidden talents and maybe artistic proclivities. What was it in particular that drove you into the idea of finding greater consciousness and peace within rather than all the externalizing that a lot of college students do?
Well, I want to just say that full disclosure, I did my rebellious thing when I first went to college. And so I experimented in a little bit of rebellion when I first went as well, not unlike most 18-year-olds then and now. But it was just unfulfilling. It was not something that led to more for me. It was something that seemed to be more of a treadmill kind of things, kind of staying in the same place. And so I was looking for something that would really kind of move me in a different direction. And that's what I found through meditation, but turning within, going inside, which was it's not the knee-jerk reaction for most people, I don't think. I think most of us worldwide, our knee-jerk reaction is to go more outside. What else can we do? Well, what more workshop can we attend? Where else can we go that's a spiritual place? And often it's right, it's close to home, it's right inside us. And of course, that's easy to say, but how do you do that? And that's what I learned how to do. And that was really the watershed moment for me, is opening myself up to myself in this different way that we happen to refer to as meditation.
Yes, yes. And the transcendental meditation technique has certainly had a global impact. It sounds like you took that as a baseline and really integrated it and made it your own, and then found maybe for those that struggled with their own meditative practice and journey, a simpler, much more easily applicable method. Tell us a little bit about that, Kelvin.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I've taken the process and made it more flexible, even more easy. I think Maharishi's greatest gift to the world, if he's to be remembered for one single thing out of anything that he did, was to come to the West and say, hey, meditation does not need to be difficult. It does not need to be focus oriented. It does not need to be clearing the mind oriented. And then that's his greatest gift, I think. And I learned that from him, and then I've taken that approach to meditation in the mind, and I've developed it even further and made it even more flexible and more easy. And now I refer to it as literally turning on the opposite of the fight or flight switch in us. And if you think about it, if you're crossing the street and that fight or flight switch goes on, which pumps the adrenaline, the glucose level spikes because you want that extra energy, to get across the street before that car that's running the red light, approaches you. You want to run across the street. Your blood pumps to your large muscles, and you make it across to the other side of the curb. Well, that's an important component of survival. That's great, but it's not great when it keeps getting turned on over and over and over again when we're in a long bank line or we're in a traffic jam, or our favorite football team is losing. Whatever,
exactly.
over and over again, and then and the fight or flight switch gets turned on, and then what happens is when it gets turned on too much, we have this adrenaline, cortisol, lactic acid, and 40 or 50 or 60 other hormones and chemicals that get deposited in our muscle tissue, in our brain tissue, and they sit there, and then they get easily triggered by anything that rubs us the wrong way going forward in our lives. And as spiritual as we may want to be, we need to deal with the neurochemicals in our bloodstream and balance them out so that we can really sustain a sense of spirituality. Otherwise, it's fleeting.
Sure.
Otherwise, it ends it ends at the end of the workshop this awesome workshop that you go to. It ends because your blood chemistry says, you know, I'm still imbalanced.
Yes.
You trigger me, I'm going to put you right back where you were. So,
right.
So that's how I'm framing what I do now, really, is teaching people how to easily turn on the opposite of the fight or flight switch, because that has to be as automatic as the fight or flight switch is, which we all know is automatic.
You know, and it's such a poignant aspect to go into, is that it doesn't matter whether your goal is for greater spiritual expansion, or it is, you know, health management, or, you know, familial relations being more smooth at home. This is widely applicable, isn't it, Kelvin? I mean, all of us need to be able to manage the lives that are not only being done to us, or that we're kind of dancing in an external co-creative, you know, network or with everyone around us, because you mentioned the traffic, and you mentioned the line, and you mentioned that there really are things that are challenging us on an external level. But it's the fact that we take all of that in and don't necessarily know how to process it as effectively, and it becomes internal dialoguing that we sometimes regurgitate and habituate. So what I'm hearing you say is, it really doesn't matter what your highest intention is for wanting to have that calmness, that conscious turning off the switch. We all need it because of the world that we happen to live in today.
That's right. I think to reframe that, I would say we as human beings have more control and less control than we think. So we have more control over things than we think. In other words, we're not totally subject to the whims and feelings of other people and whatever they want, and so forth. So we can make strategic decisions and make tactical and strategic decisions and take action to control our lives, to direct our lives in certain ways. At the same time, we are not in control of everything. There's always a level of uncertainty with everything, and that's where free will comes in. I'm a big believer in free will, because that happens to be reflective of our experience, of mine, and I think everybody's experience in life, that we have choice. And what does that mean? If I have choice and you have choice and everybody else has choice, and there's 7 billion human minds, never mind the animal minds and whoever else on the planet, there's at least 7 billion human minds all making different choices. Well, that all influences and affects us, some more powerfully and more intensely, those who are closer to us in various relationships, but even those who are not have some very indirect relationships to us. So what can we ultimately have control over? Ourselves, right? How we ourselves view the world, how we view ourselves within ourselves. And so that's where I think we need to start. And by starting there, we can have a more powerful effect externally in helping change the world.
Beautiful. I could not agree more. And I know that we've had a little bit of dialogue about the high intensity peak experiences that we're having in society. We've talked about the fact that there have been all these terrorist attacks in Europe, and we've all experienced quite a bit on the news about what's happened recently in Las Vegas. We've got fires in California. We've got hurricanes we still haven't completely navigated out of. When we've got our day-to-day experiences that we're looking to manage through meditation and consciousness, and again, a physiological neurochemical reset, what really happens to our bodies, to our minds, and to this spatial reality that we're having when we've got all these additional issues that are impacting us, Kelvin, not only as individuals, but also as a society?
Sure. I think it's even more so than ever because of the 24-hour news cycle and the 365, 24/7 sound bites that we are bombarded with constantly. Even if we're not watching the news, whatever our news channel is that we choose to watch, we hear it on the street, we hear other people, and people are watching clips on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And that only adds to this fight or flight response getting triggered excessively. It adds to the adrenaline and the cortisol, the lactic acid, and the other chemicals that are sitting there imbalanced, stored in our muscle tissue and our brain tissue because they can't get offloaded fast enough. And so there's an increased, I have a page on one of my websites on millennials. And there's a lot of research, and you've probably seen articles, the uptick in number of millennials contacting me from around the world, different cultures, different religions. It doesn't matter what culture or language they speak, and they are incredibly stressed out. Now, that's true for Gen Xers and baby boomers as well, but the millennials is something that has surprised a lot of people. And I cite some research on my website as to why that's happening and so forth. But the bottom line is we need to help people, and we need to help people, whether they're millennials or whether they're 90-year-olds, it doesn't matter, navigate life more smoothly, more easily, more anxiety-free, so they can live life more fully in the present. Mm-hmm. And those of us who are interested in helping others in the world, our primary source of energy needs to be from within ourselves first. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, it doesn't matter how much giving we want to give to others, it'll be insufficient. It'll be only partial, and we won't be as effective.
Right.
So.
It's the old adage of having to fill our well first, isn't it, really, Kelvin?
Absolutely.
I mean, we know that we need to take care of ourselves to have the overflow, to be able to be gracious and to care for our families and to be able to show up fully, for those that we work with or however we show up in our lives. Then we add the element of too many uncertainties. You work a lot with those that have fear around not being in the healthiest state and losing family members, the transition of dying. Let's talk a little bit about how you've taken this consciousness and meditation and an internal state of being to helping those that have those genuine fears about death and dying.
Sure. So let's talk about the fear of uncertainty first, and then we can maybe get into the 4 belief systems that I've come up with and talk about in my book, so forth. So the fear of uncertainty. First of all, uncertainty is a given, isn't it? I mean, I have a certain kind of bread that I like, and when I go to the store, it seems like a lot of other people like that same kind of bread too, because I go there and I never know sometimes if it's good, they're going to be all out of it. So there's inevitable uncertainty in life. It doesn't matter what aspect of life we look at. The issue is, how can we get rid of our fear around that uncertainty? And I've found that around death and dying, that's a big one, the fear of uncertainty. But even people who don't feel like they're afraid of death and dying have concerns, fears, anxieties to some degree about uncertainty. And the way to deal with that, I think, is to somehow, in addition to what we've already talked about in terms of turning on the opposite of the fight or flight switch and the neurochemical balancing, in addition to that, I think we need to find a way to turn within in order to expand the mind out of what I sometimes refer to as the supermarket aisle mind. So if we can expand the mind outside of the supermarket aisle, meaning, you walk down the supermarket aisle and you're thinking, oh, do I need apples? Do I need broccoli? What do I need? Your mind is focused. It's making decisions. Most people are, everybody's very familiar with that, but most people, unfortunately, equate that with their entire mind. And my point is that that's only a small portion of our mind. And psychologists even talk about that. It's a small portion of our mind. Our mind is much more vast than that. And if we can open up these other rooms, so to speak, to these other areas of our mind, then that gives us an inner anchor, an inner sense of stability. Even though the uncertainty still exists in life, we develop an inner anchor, an inner stability, so that we go, oh, okay, I can handle it. Yeah. My mind is vast. I didn't realize how powerful it was. So that's a change in perspective that comes by expanding the mind outside of this small container that we tend to look at the mind as. Mm-hmm.
Right? And obviously, and I want to come back to the fears around death and dying as it pertains to your expertise. But I'm working with those in the holistic field and my colleagues and also in mental health. You can listen to someone who's prone to anxiety disorders tell you the moment of epiphany, of peak awareness, where they realize they're actually starting to create a panic attack. And they get really, really acute in, I can either let it continue to roll out and experience all of the physiological aspects of it and the discomfort and the sweating and the heart rate, or they could talk themselves down and off of it and start to realize, no, I don't need to experience this right now. That fear isn't actually rational right now. I'm not in any danger. And I think that is part of what is available to each of us as sentient beings, as deeply intelligent beings, is that there is more power than we actually recognize as to how we run the energy for the events that are impacting us. As you said, changing our perception of the world that's coming at us by applying some of these principles. So what I'd love for you to do is to explain some of these 4 principles that you said that
Sure.
are a regular part of your teaching.
Sure. So the 4 belief systems that I discuss are belief systems that are not religious or culturally based.
Mm-hmm.
These are belief systems that really underlie and support all the religious and cultural beliefs that exist in the world. So here's the 4 beliefs. Oh, by the way, the reason I came up with these is because when my mom died, was it 35, almost 40 years ago, and I was fairly young and she was young, it really blew me away. And I started talking with people, and I started realizing when I started talking about death and dying with people, they would naturally default to their religious and cultural beliefs, which is normal, natural, and it's fine. However, what I noticed is that people started disagreeing, and they would get into disagreements about stuff. Instead of talking about death and dying, they would get into disagreements about their perception of it, or what happened, or this or that after the person died, etc. So the 4 beliefs is a way to look at death and dying through one of these lenses, to talk to other people who may not share your belief about death and dying in a way that doesn't step all over their beliefs about death from a religious standpoint. Typically.
It's much more compassionate. Good. Let's hear it. Yeah. I'm excited to hear.
So the first belief system is the physical science belief, which is my body dies, my mind dies. That's it. My mind shuts off. So it was the belief system that my dad had when my dad died. So before he died. And then, that's the physical science belief. No belief in no afterlife. That's belief system number 1. The second belief system is belief in an afterlife, but there's fear. So I call it fear of continued existence. And the fear may be due to any number of reasons, but it doesn't really matter what the fear is. The solution is the same. And the third belief system is belief in afterlife, but no fear. And so they could call it heaven, they could call it nirvana, they could call it whatever they want, depending on religion and culture, it doesn't matter, but no fear. Fourth belief system is basically reincarnation. It's believe in past lives, future lives, and so forth. The idea that the mind is conscious, can make decisions after the body dies, the mind will continue and can choose to come back or not if it wants to. So if it wants to come back, great. If it doesn't, it can stay. The mind can stay. Our personality. When I say mind, by the way, sometimes people are more comfortable with soul or spirit or consciousness. Same thing. Mm-hmm. I'm using mind because I like to use words that are non-religious, mm-hmm. Religiously loaded.
Thank you for that.
Same thing.
I think that's important to appeal to our audience on that level. We always are trying to merge global and very spatial belief systems into some sort of a tapestry to dialogue with, and I appreciate, how carefully you've crafted the understandings as you're teaching them. I'm finding a little bit of playful amusement with the belief systems, because there are those that would fall into a reincarnistic worldview and would say they are equally fearful of having to come back and repeat karma, right?
Yes.
Those that maybe would lean a little bit more towards a Judeo-Christian that would say, depending on what end of the pendulum they were on at the moment they died, there may be fear, there may be celebration and rejoicing, and some would be fearful to not ever exist again. So tell our listeners, our viewers, how you apply each of these belief systems as you work with your clientele.
Right. So the first thing I always tell people, and they can see it right up front on my website, is that I do not require, in fact, I discourage people from just blindly believing whatever I believe. And I don't even get into my beliefs with them unless they explicitly ask me.
Mm-hmm.
They can kind of connect the dots somewhat by if they read enough of my material and my essays and blogs and stuff. But it's all about them. From my perspective, it's all about them. It's helping them. So what does that mean? That means it's about respecting, understanding, and acknowledging what their belief system is. I'll give you an example. A daughter, she's in her 40s or 40s. Yeah, she's in her 40s in London. Found me on the web, and her mother was dying. Her mother, who was in her 80s, was dying, and very strangely, the woman had so much morphine in her. The mother had so much morphine in her in the hospital. The doctors could not figure out how she could be still alive. So the daughter thought that even though the mother had told her before she became nonverbal, she couldn't speak at the end, but before then she had said, she wasn't afraid of death. But her daughter thought maybe there was something. So she had me. I said, look, she cannot speak with me. That's okay. When are you going? She's going tomorrow. Great. Take your phone, hold the speaker up to her, and I'll talk with her. So I talked with her mother for about 15 minutes. Her mom said one word to her before she died. She hung up the phone with me, and the daughter told me, she said, beautiful. And then the next evening, she went into a coma, and she died 2 days later.
Wow.
And so the point is, I'll say whatever I think is appropriate with that person. And so I look through their belief lens. Mm-hmm. She happened to be a devout Catholic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on a belief, depending on the fear, I match up the belief system that they have with the fear that they're having. And so in this situation, I had to guess a little bit, and obviously, and I had to I wanted to reassure her that she could let go, even though her daughter and her sisters were all telling her the same thing. Mm-hmm. But you bring up an interesting point about people who may be afraid of non-existence. I get that one a lot.
Yeah.
And part of what I'll do is clarify with people what their belief is, because sometimes people are not real crystal clear on what their belief about death is. And therefore, they're not crystal clear about what their fear is, although they generally refer to it as a fear of death. Sometimes it is a fear of death. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it might be the fear of the process of dying. And so then I draw a distinction, and I just explain to them how the two fears are different, and then how we can talk about relieving the fear depending on which one they really do have.
Okay.
So part of what I'm doing is clarifying with people in a way that clarifies their understanding at first.
Okay. So understanding that beliefs are migratory and recognizing that sometimes there's so much discomfort around even the topic, they really haven't investigated it as thoroughly as they need to for you to be able to directly apply some of that wisdom and work with them. There is a degree of investigation and tenderness in meeting them right where they are on the bridge, isn't there, Kelvin? There
absolutely is. And so they'll explain it to me as best they can. And like you say, it's maybe migratory. It may evolve over time. And that's fine. And sometimes people are hybrids, quite frankly. They may be more than one of those four belief systems. And like you said, even if you have the reincarnation belief, you may still be afraid of other things. Mm-hmm. You could be the fear of eternity, of coming back, or fear of coming back as a mosquito in some belief systems and so forth.
Certainly.
All kinds of fears. So I address those depending on what their specific fear is, and I help them understand it better, reduce the fear about it. We talk about that, and then in some cases, people will choose to take my meditation class, or they'll take somebody else's meditation class, but I encourage them to turn within in an easy and effortless way, and in order to change their neurophysiology. Because like you said earlier, yeah, we can make choices. And you talked about people who were highly anxious and may have a panic attack. and they can almost talk themselves out of it, out of the panic attack. But even that is temporary. It's a temporary fix. We need to change the physiology in order for it to be permanent, because as much as we are minds and souls, for sure, as long as we're on planet Earth, we have a physical body. And the body chemistry affects our emotions, absolutely, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
And so we have to be mindful of that.
And it goes both ways, doesn't it, Kelvin? It's actually a habituated state of being. I know we've talked about this on other segments of the show, that the neurochemistry can absolutely be affected by habituated thought, triggered emotion, getting addicted to our own fear response, our own sensual pleasure response. This is, the whole thing around neuroplasticity, right? But then our physical body's the same thing: gut responses, stress responses on the adrenal system, etc. So really, the heart of your work addresses that overall addiction to the fear and the neurochemical, physiochemical response that then we can really see for what it is, and that is it's kind of a cyclical self-replicating process. If we go into the meditation and we go into some of this retooling of our perception as you teach it, then we can rewrite that and not be experiencing some of that addictive process that much of our science is starting to point to is very, very prevalent in our society today, these addictive states of reoccurring emotions. So where do you start with a client? Once you really assess where their beliefs are,
Sure.
What would be the best first starting point so some of our listeners and viewers can have an idea of what it would be like to work with you?
Sure. Well, the best first starting point is, it depends on where they are on the spectrum. It depends how extreme they are. But typically, when people are working with me, they're all over the spectrum. And so I have to assess where they are at first. And then those who are very extreme, I may teach them a simple breathing technique on the phone immediately. And I do that for free for people typically. I mean, just on their first call. The first call with me is part of my nonprofit, as I offer a free first call with anybody who wants to have a session with me for an hour.
Phenomenal.
And so I do that as part of my nonprofit work, and I offer that for free. And I may teach them a technique immediately, one or two techniques on the phone immediately, depending on how acute they are. And this happened actually recently with somebody who had initially talked with me, I think about a year ago. It was about a year ago he spoke with me, and he read my book, and then he found himself sitting outside the emergency room. I didn't know he was sitting outside the emergency room. We happened to be texting. He texted me from the parking lot at 2 a.m. in Colorado, where he was about to walk in and try to get some help because he was having another series of panic attacks. So he sat with me. Well, I virtually sat with him on the phone in his car in the parking lot, and I walked him through some techniques, and it calmed him down, and he felt so much better. He ended up not going into the. Wow. He didn't feel he had to go in, and then we talked about his fears and so forth, and he's taking my meditation class in right now, actually, as we speak. So that's typically what happens with folks, but I leave it to them to decide whether they want to learn an internal meditation process with me or they go elsewhere. They may have somebody that they already feel aligned with. That's okay. My whole thing is, here's the structure. You need to deal with it externally in terms of understanding better, but we need to deal with it internally as well in terms of our turning within and also our neurophysiology. Mm-hmm. And I think in both, to your point, in both areas, we're missing half of it in both arenas. Very often, self-development processes are purely mental-oriented self-development processes that lack a certain degree of understanding about what's going on, not only within the neurophysiology at the time, but also with related issues like anxiety and so forth. And I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor, so I don't do therapy. but I understand enough about neurophysiology and in the anxiety arena to direct people and help them fill in gaps in their understanding. And then I think on the other end of the spectrum, when we're dealing with people and just talking them through things all the time, we got to realize that we have to deal with changing the neuroplasticity and the neurophysiology. Otherwise, it's going to be a temporary fix. They're going to feel good for a day or two, and then they're going to be back where they started from.
Right. Right. It is a rewiring of the brain. If you listen to, obviously, you're an expert in your field, and you know that you're in good company. You know, we have, experts like Dr. Bruce Lipton and others that have come together in a massive shift in human consciousness to better understand how much we are not only determining which genes, which chromosomes turn on and become dominant in our bodies, as opposed to at one point we used to believe that there was more of kind of a randomness to it. You know, you just inherit what you inherit. It left a whole lot of loose ends. And as we have advanced in a lot of quantum physics and quantum mechanics and a lot of greater understanding about how they play with the body and the mind as it pertains particularly to the brain, we're just talking more about the hardware here. Yes, we can create habituated states of thought, emotional fields that our bodies then habituate, respond to, and they kind of become cyclical, don't they, Kelvin? Kind of self-sabotaging. So
yeah, they can.
You're interjecting a new thought concept. You're introducing a new habituated state of being that's a lot more intentional, it sounds like, for the clients that you work with.
Yeah, it's intentional, absolutely. And it's holistic because it feeds each other. Both sides. We have the understanding supporting the experience. Mm-hmm. We have the experience of turning within, and then we have the understanding of what's going on in that whole process. And when I work with people, it tends to be, lifetime work with people to the extent that they want it, want that level of continued communication with me. I'm open and receptive to having those kinds of conversations with folks on an ongoing basis. Folks who are even more acute and more intense in their panic or anxiety states when they come to me, I tend to spend more than the 4-day class. It's a 4-day class for the meditation, for example. I spend much more time with them, checking in with them, talking with them on an ongoing basis for sometimes months afterwards. And, it's a kind of situation where, my nonprofit work is such that that we just ask for donations for people for that work, on an ongoing basis as it continues. Because depending on where people are at, some people can continue that type of work and financially support it, and others have more difficulty. So we have people who donate to our nonprofit, and they help other people who can't quite afford to ongoing sessions like that with folks. So we're very, very open and receptive, and we're here to help people.
If I can touch to that, it sounds like because of the philanthropy that you're offering through the nonprofit, maybe the technique and the styles that you use are less conventional in so much that medical insurance and maybe what would be covered in mental health as a specialty isn't necessarily supporting the clients from getting the type of work and the type of assistance that you provide. Would that be correct, Kelvin?
I think that's absolutely correct, yeah. And as a result, I get a lot of clients who've tried various processes through their provider, whether it's a therapist or psychiatrist or doctors and so forth. And those processes have been helpful to a certain degree, and then it takes them to a certain place, and then they really need more help to get really to the place where they need to be, and that's how they end up on my doorstep, so to speak. So yeah, I see that a lot.
Unfortunately, most of our scientific principles around medicine are still that materialism view. Science has evolved over time, and we see everything as what is tangible, what is witnessable. It doesn't always cover all of the bases that science has recently revealed through quantum theory that is more academic now than hypotheses or theory, that only 4.7% out of 100% of what's there is actually considered real matter by the human spectrum and what we can actually see with cones and rods. And so when you're trying to help someone that is experiencing something that's a little bit less tangible, an anxiety trigger for them, and there is not going to be an immediate drug, there isn't going to be an immediate materialistic, scientific, medical application towards it, there needs to be this type of work available for them, Kelvin. And I really want to commend you for creating the nonprofit and having such good people that are looking to support it. We already know that there's enough addiction going on with those that are taking multiple medications that are trying to compensate for what 2 medications ago was supposed to have handled by now. We're living with such a soup of, chemical activity. Just giving people hope and showing up with compassion at 2 in the morning is a very, very rare level of compassionate care these days.
Yeah, there's a gentleman who's 72 years old now. Richard's maybe 73 now. I started working with him about a year and a half ago, and so Newsweek wrote an article on and I was featured in it. And Kaiser Health News actually wrote the article. It was picked up by Newsweek, Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Sun-Tribune, and some Hispanic newspapers and so forth. But obviously, 99% of the people I work with want it kept confidential, who they are,
right? Of course.
As it relates to their fear of death and dying. But Richard stepped up. Richard Bridgman is his name. He's in Illinois, and he stepped up and he said, "No, I'm fine. I want to tell people about this because you helped me." After 50 years, he said, since he was 20 years old, he said he's had this the fear of death and dying, and a debilitating fear of death and dying, and so he's featured in there. But the point is that it could happen to anybody at any age, and here's somebody who got past it, and he still struggles with it from time to time, and he calls and we talk about it. And I help him get past the next hump. But he has tools, he has a technique, and he has something that he can do to deal with this. And so he does not feel alone. He doesn't feel helpless, and he's not paralyzed anymore, which is huge.
That is so exciting to hear. And obviously, the work is profound that you had such a reach, and exciting that we're in an era where that can actually reach levels of media and publication, so that others are aware that this is available. I mean, I'm very encouraged to know that, because we're here kind of beating on the fact that the mainstream narrative is doing a lot of fear porn and fear mongering, and what a beautiful breakthrough that this made it into so many different publications. That's exciting. I want to ask you, for those that here's another fear that beyond the death, beyond the dying, beyond even the panic attacks, some people are just afraid to be alone in their own company. Can you address how you work with those that are actually maybe afraid of meditation because to them they haven't learned how to have a loving dialogue with themselves and their own sentience? And that causes quite a few people to even shy away from doing the meditation because the level of abyss that they find when they go inside doesn't necessarily meet the warmth that they're needing.
Right. Well, it depends on the intensity of that. If it was really intense, like I alluded to earlier, I would have them start with a different processes than simply just closing the eyes and doing the technique that I teach, which I walk through people step by step and all of that. So there's a specific technique involved, but it's eyes closed. So they may need to do something in an interim basis first, and that's how I would probably, if they're really in an acute state, like you're talking about. So that would be a coping mechanism that may help them on an interim basis deal with stuff, and in terms of being comfortable and alone with themselves. It may be kind of like a baby step in that direction. But typically, the not feeling comfortable with oneself, where does that come from? It could come from any number of sources. And as I said, I'm not here to do therapy with people, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter to me where it specifically comes from. The issue is how can we reduce that and change their neurochemistry and their neuroplasticity so that experience just goes away. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it involves my meditating with them, for example, on the phone, virtually, for periods of time. People who are in a more acute state, I will do that with people. And so being on the phone with them, and there's an energetic, as you discussed, in terms of energies, there's an energetic component to that. And whether they experience it very consciously or not, there's an energetic component to my meditating with them, and or that you notice when you meditate with anybody, if that other person is grounded and within themselves. Mm-hmm. And if they're grounded within themselves, that kind of osmosis, if you will, has a positive effect in terms of allowing that person who's less comfortable to feel more comfortable.
Right.
So that's a couple of things.
So we're getting a lot of data, Kelvin, and I think that anyone that's paying attention to a more holistic approach to the news will hear, we've got at least 1 in 4 individuals in the United States now dealing with some degree of inflammation, and they're talking about, man, woman, and child. We know that millennials have a sense of unrest. You mentioned some statistics about millennials feeling anxious, and I think that the anxiousness and the uncertainty, and also the constant externalization of stimulation that we get in so many aspects of our day-to-day lives, from entertainment to just interacting with technology on down. How would you help a real mixed audience, which is, I believe, what we have tonight, kind of encapsulate how they could best apply a meditative process? Let's just talk about the simpler method that you've created and break it down into bite-sized pieces so they can start to integrate what it would be like to actually work with you on an individual basis.
Well, I mean, I could teach some people, so everybody right now, it's a very, very simple technique that I have people do initially, and that's simply just putting your hand on your belly button. You're putting either hand on your belly button, and you take 6 or 8 or 10 deep breaths. Mm-hmm. So this is a very non-mental technique, and it's intentionally not mental, because if you're really in an anxiety state and very uncomfortable and you're kind of worked up, you're already in a mental state, so you don't want to add to that. So what this does is it gets your energy back down into your body, and by putting your hand over your belly button, and you can do this in public, you can do it eyes open, eyes closed, it doesn't matter. I have people doing it in conference rooms when they're in their law firm. I have kids doing it in school when they're at school and they're missing their parents. I have had a 10-year-old just did it a few months ago before he went on stage to do his theater production, and he was crying in the car on the way. I said on the way in the car, put your hand and while you're waiting before you go on stage, stand on the side and do this. Nobody will know what you're doing. They won't even pay attention, and just do this. Take a few deep breaths like this, put your hand in your belly button, and it calmed him down. Mm-hmm. It's a temporary fix. It's not permanent, but has an immediate effect of getting the person back out of their head without thinking about it. Because I'm a big believer in not forcing. You can't force to relax. If you try to relax, you're not going to relax. Right. So you can't force to not think what you're thinking. So here's a way you introduce what I call the principle of the third element. You're introducing another element here that's not the usual thinking. Mm-hmm. And so you put your hand there, take some deep breaths, it gets you centered and grounded. Mm-hmm. So that's a simple thing that people could do.
Okay. It kind of centralizes everything, doesn't it? It just sort of brings it, like you said, anchored and back into focus at that point.
It just brings you back into your body without you having to think much about it. And it automatically has a calming effect. My kids did it when they were in kindergarten, and I have adults doing it in their law firms. It doesn't matter. Nobody knows what you're doing. You're sitting there, you put your hand in your belly button. Nobody's paying attention where your hand is.
So it's bringing a level of focus and clarity into, if we wanted to look at it from the scientific implications, obviously they talk about the gut being the second brain. Exactly. Flooding the body with oxygen is always a good thing. It helps reset, some of the neurochemicals at the same time. But it's kind of an all-over technique from what you're saying that you can apply to just about anyone to bring them back into a space that's anchored so that you can move into the next steps with them.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, where do they go from there, Kelvin? Tell us what you would offer next.
So typically the way I would work with people is then we have a conversation about how much they already know about meditation. I describe in much more detail about my process and how it's different and how it's how it's non-focus based and not clearing the mind. It's not about clearing the mind. It's not about focusing the mind. It's not about concentration or in any way having to push thoughts out of the mind. That is a discussion that I have with people because most people are thinking that it does involve clearing the mind.
Right.
And it's important to have this discussion before I actually ever teach them, because there's a certain amount of resetting or recalibrating or unlearning almost that has to take place when I work with people. Because most people are coming with a lot of preconceived notions about meditation, and I have to and almost disabuse them of that to a certain extent. I say that jokingly, but it's true. And there's a lot of I would call it misunderstanding about meditation, because and I've thought about this. I've been teaching for over 40 years, so I've thought a lot about this, and I think essentially it distills down to one thing. And the reason this has happened over the millennia is because somebody along the way, or somebodies along the way, some meditation teachers along the way, took a waking state rules, basically, and applied them to meditation. And so they take waking state rules, and what do you do in waking state? You focus. Mm-hmm. Well, then you apply that in meditation. It's not appropriate to apply those same rules. In the same way, I say, why would we apply dream state rules to waking state? That would obviously be not a good idea.
Right.
We get in a car accident, you know. So
yeah.
and yet we routinely accept the fact that when a meditation teacher starts telling us to meditate and to focus on this and focus on our breath and focus on a candle or focus on this word or focus on whatever, we do it. And it's not appropriate, because the mind thinks differently in meditation. And an understanding of how the mind thinks differently in meditation is crucial for the good meditation teacher to be able to take the student from point A, meaning where they are,
right,
to point B, which is what everybody describes. Everybody can describe point B, but how do you get there? That's the key thing. And if you don't understand that the mind operates differently in meditation, it's gonna take you a circuitous route. That's the key. And so I get into that discussion with people in much greater detail and answer questions about that. That's the next step that I usually do.
No, we're just running a little bit tight on time, Kelvin, sure. And I know that you've got a wealth that is available on your websites and upcoming events, upcoming teachings that are going on. We really do want the listeners, the viewers that are here, to understand that there is not a one-size-fit-all, but that you have created a much more simpler, a much more ready-go entrainment that allows them to more naturally step into those states. We know brain waves are all part of it. We don't want to be in alpha and beta 24/7. We do understand the need for delta. We understand the dream state of theta, the meditative state of theta. And science is coming out talking about gamma being a tremendous epiphany state, kind of a DMT state, a really heightened sense of a greater consciousness and awareness. And so we want to open up the idea all of these states are available, and that there's appropriate times and better techniques to be able to do it. So let's get them towards your website. Why don't we go ahead and tell them a little bit about your book and your websites, if you will?
Sure. So the website is Turning Within. I have a couple of nonprofit websites. turningwithin.org. It's just those words spelled out, turningwithin.org. And the other website is overcomingthefearofdeath.org. And it's just those words all spelled out. And if you can't remember, there's a link on every page on either of my websites. If you can't remember the link to what the other website was called, there's a link, a hot link on the bottom of every page, in the footer of every page on all of my websites. They link to the other websites. So, and my book is called Overcoming the Fear of Death, and that is available on Amazon. So you can just Google my name and Overcoming the Fear of Death. So it's Overcoming the Fear of Death through each of the four main belief systems. It's the full title, but either way, the short version of the title will get you there as well. I have my next meditation class is starting November 10th, Friday. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 days consecutive, and then the last class, the fourth class, is a couple of weeks out after that. And it's about an hour, hour and a half each class. So you can learn more about that on the website. And also there's a couple of free articles available that people may be interested in terms of finding out more about their fear of death and their beliefs about death. They're just their general beliefs about death and dying. There's a questionnaire that we created that's available for free on the Overcoming the Fear of Death website. And so you just go on the homepage and you'll see there's that questionnaire is available there for people. And there's also an article I wrote on my turningwithin.org website on how to choose the right meditation technique for you. So I talk about a number of different approaches and different meditation techniques and why and how they exist out there and so forth, so that people can kind of do a mini survey of themselves, so to speak, by reading that article. That's available on the turningwithin.org website.
Wow,
so
that is
all
exceptional.
of those are for free.
That is just an exceptional amount of generous tools with which they can better vet themselves and know really where they're ready to step in and work with you either directly or come to some of your gatherings. And it was such a big topic tonight, Kelvin. There's only so far that we can go in an hour, but I really think you did a great job of demonstrating it's fear in general that we're looking to manage more in our lives, a greater state of life and well-being, because we want to live these lives well. And when we are going through transitional states, there's ways to do it with greater delicacy, compassion, and understanding. And we thank you for your message. It's been great having you tonight. Thank you for joining us. And to the rest of our viewing audience, if you like Solutionary TV, we like it. We're having a blast with it. There are so many fabulous guests with amazing content like Kelvin, like those that we've had in the past. And if you want to keep seeing it on the air, we want to keep delivering it to you. Please go to solutionarytv.com and consider being one of our sponsors. Just an anonymous donation on the donation button is an easy thing to do. And if you're interested in actually going to the Patreon page and being a regular patron, that is how we've fueled the arts since the beginning of time, and the first arts came about, and that's what we're about here too. We would love to be able to bring you more of that content, and we'd love to be able to have the honor of your patronage. Remember, we're in this together, and we are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.